Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeannie Montblanc, and on behalf of the Great Basin Fire Science Delivery team and partners, I'd like to welcome you to our first webinar of the season, Drill Comparisons for Seeding in the Great Basin, presented by Jeff Ott from the U.S. Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station in Boise, Idaho. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to let you know that you may ask questions of the speaker or me at any time during the webinar by typing them into the questions pane of your control panel that's found at the top right of your screen. I can respond to questions addressed to me throughout the webinar, but I'll field questions for Jeff after the presentation. I will show up in your questions pane as the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center, but it's really me, Jeannie. Let's see. I would also like to let you know that whatever you do in your control panel does not affect the webinar presentation, so you're welcome to type a test message or test your audio at any time in your control panel, and we won't know about it. Now I would like to introduce our presenter. Dr. Jeff Ott is a postdoctoral research geneticist at the U.S. Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station in Boise, Idaho. He works with Drs. Nancy Shaw and Francis Kilkenny on plant ecology in the Great Basin. He received his bachelor's and master's degrees from Brigham Young University and his PhD from the University of North Carolina. He previously worked at the Rocky Mountain Research Station Shrub Sciences Lab in Provo, Utah, studying the effects of seeding and chaining following wildfires. Welcome, Jeff, and thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you. Am I on?
I'm making you the presenter right now. Okay.
Okay, I hope that did it.
I don't see it yet.
You don't see me yet?
There we go.
Okay, I'm on.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm glad to be here giving this presentation, and what I'd like to do first of all is give some acknowledgments. I'm going to be talking primarily about this project that was funded by the Joint Fire Sciences Program, entitled Equipment and Strategies to Enhance the Post-Fire Establishment and Persistence of Great Basin Native Plants. And I've listed here different PIs and collaborators, and there are many other people I could have listed. This is a big project that has involved a lot of different people over several years, and I want to make sure that credit is given to those people. I myself am a relative newcomer to this project, but I'll be representing everyone today, and I hope I can present this material adequately. I also have listed here a publication from a few years ago. This was based on my master's project, where I looked at rehabilitation treatments and their effects after fire. I'm going to use I'm going to talk a little bit about this to give a little bit of background into the topic and tie it into what I'm looking at currently and the way the conditions we have now compared to how they were a few years ago. But first, for a little bit of background, most of you are probably familiar to some degree with this, but this gives a bit of a scenario of what you expect in the Great Basin when fire hits. A lot of areas have mature sagebrush or pinyon juniper vegetation, and fire will kill off the dominant woody species of these communities. And if there aren't a lot of perennial grasses and forbs that are resistant to fire, then you end up with a lot of exposed soil that's subject to erosion. And then there's always the problem of invasion by cheatgrass and other annuals, which cause a lot of problems and increase the risk of future fire. So wildfire rehabilitation is the the set of management activities that are intended to reduce these sort of undesirable fire impacts. And one of the primary components of wildfire rehabilitation is seeding. So we introduce seeds trying to reestablish the desirable plants we want in these systems and try and do it as quickly as possible. So now here's a slide from my thesis defense several years ago that I thought was interesting, so I'm throwing it in here. I had this quote from the BLM. 1996 was the most active, extensive, and devastating fire year ever experienced in Utah. And it was based on these fires and the treatments that were done that I did my master's project. These were the rehabilitation treatments that were carried out, use of a rangeland drill for seeding, aerial seeding from an aircraft, aerial broadcast seeding followed by chaining. Chaining means just dragging this large chain across the soil surface in a way that creates a suitable seed bed and buries seed so that it can germinate. And these were the seeds that were seeded by the BLM field office where I did my work. Mainly introduced species not native to North America, although there are a couple of native species here. And these were old standbys like crested wheatgrass, which has been developed because of its ease of establishment and adaptation to the environments of the Great Basin. So to sum up just quickly the results of this study, I'm not going to go into any more detail, but basically aerial seeding followed by chaining was more effective than the broadcast seeding alone, and drill seeding was the most effective at all, where in areas where it was possible to drill. So with that background, what I'd like to think about next are recent developments since that period in the late 90s when that study that I just mentioned was going on. And I've got three things here. First of all, there's been more wildfire. And so rehabilitation has continued to be important. There's been an increased attention given to native plants for post-fire seeding. And there have been improvements in rangeland seeding technology. So just to briefly talk about each of those things. Some of you might have been chuckling or perhaps cringing when I showed that quote of 1996 being the worst year ever, since I've been able to find some other quotes of subsequent years where each year seems to be worse than the last. So we've had this increasing trend of wildfire and bad wildfire years. And in 2007 and 2012, we had some exceptionally large fires in the Great Basin that you can see here. And this chart shows the number of acres burned on BLM lands over the past 20 years, that 1996 year, and then other years that exceeded it. So now, transitioning to the idea of native plants and their role in wildfire rehabilitation. This chart kind of parallels the last one I showed in that there are large spikes during the years when there's a lot of fire. It shows the amount of seed that's purchased by the BLM and the proportion of that is non-native versus native seed. Increasingly, native seed has been purchased by the BLM, and that partially reflects policies that have encouraged the use of native seeds when they're available and when it's feasible. So to give some examples of native species that can be seeded, these are species with large seeds, and by large I mean 500,000 or fewer seeds per pound. That probably sounds pretty large. Perennial grasses like blue bunch wheatgrass, Indian ricegrass, and baba bunch squirreltail can substitute for crested wheatgrass in drills because these seeds are large. They can handle being buried and will emerge after being drill seeded. In contrast, there are species like those shown here that have smaller seeds and that can't tolerate being buried as well. So it's better to simply broadcast these seeds on the surface, ideally making sure that they have good contact with the soil surface. So big sagebrush, yarrow, rubber rabbit brush, sandbird bluegrass, and different species of penstemon belong in this group. So if your goal is to seed a diverse mixture of native species, and you have to deal with the fact that there is a lot of variation in these variables you see here, in the different seed shapes and sizes, the seed bed requirements, the depths and appropriate seeding rates, and how those species would interact. And so this is a continuing focus of research and a focus of technological developments. So with the right technology, one of the ways that you can get around some of these things is to use appropriate machinery and methods. So here are a couple of developments that are helpful. I showed up here on top multiple seed boxes. In this case, this drill has 3 different types of boxes for different types of seed. This is looking down in a box that can handle fluffy seed that has a lot of fluffy appendages, and these wheels allow that seed to be properly moved through the drill. These multiple seed boxes have actually been around for quite a few years, but they're an important component for seeding native seed mixtures. The minimum till drill is a newer development. It was introduced in 2000, and it was designed to reduce the impacts of the drill to the soil and to allow a more precise placement of seeds in the soil.
Hi, Jeff. Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. So we had a comment that sometimes it sounds like you're turning your head away from the microphone, but when you're speaking right into it, it sounds great. So I just wanted to give you a heads up.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
I'll try and keep consistent with that then.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay, so what I'd like to do next is go in a little bit more detail describing the features of these rangeland drills. So this is a standard conventional rangeland drill, and what you see here are these discs that have a tilling effect. They'll till up the soil and they create these furrows where the seed is placed. These little chains serve to cover up the seed, and sometimes you'll have sloughing from the sides of these furrows into the bottom, and that will further bury the seed. The problem is that it's hard to bury the seed at a precise depth with these seed. There can be variation, and you don't know exactly at what depth those seeds are going to end up. So one of the features of the minimum till drill was these hydraulic units that put pressure on wheels to give a better and more uniform seeding depth. You can see a blade here that creates a narrow furrow, and this is a press wheel that comes behind, and and we'll cover up those furrows. You could also have chains. Another feature of some of the newer models of the minimum till drill are these imprinter units. These are replacements for the blades and that create furrows that can be used if you just want to broadcast seeds on the surface and then have these imprinters to press those seeds into the soil and create a better seed-to-soil contact. So if you're wanting to seed in furrows and also broadcast with the same drill at the same time, this is one way to go about that. You can set up so that you alternate the rows. You can have an imprinter and then a drill furrow and so on. And the different boxes allow different seed types to be separated. So you can see here one box carries the broadcast seed mix, one box carries the drilled seed mix, and by alternating seed in these two boxes, you can get seeding to occur in the two different rows. The same thing can be done with the conventional rangeland drill. So going back to one of these drills, this was a configuration where each of the other blades was lifted so that it didn't create a furrow, and then from these aluminum tubes you got seed being broadcast. Chains were used to cover both the broadcast and the drilled seed in these alternate rows. So what I've been describing with these different configurations of alternating drill furrows and broadcast rows is what is studied in this study that I'm now going to be talking about. Was determined that these were some of the most promising ways of seeding native plants. And so the part of this study that I'm going to be talking about focused on these objectives. We wanted to compare these two types of drills, their ability to establish mixtures of species, and also looking at different ways of broadcasting the small seeding species, whether from the drills, as I described, or from aerial broadcasting at two different times, in the fall and the winter. Wyoming big sagebrush got particular attention here. It's a species that's commonly broadcast seeded. We wanted to look at different seeding rates and see what the effects were of varying the amount of seed that you placed. We also wanted to compare the impacts of these drills on both invasive annuals and residual natives, with the hope being that we could reduce the amount of annuals and have as little impact on the natives as possible. So we implemented this study as an experiment that was replicated at 4 sites in Oregon, Idaho, and Utah. And these were all sites dominated by Wyoming big sagebrush prior to burning. The fires pretty much wiped out the seed beds. These were also sites where it was possible to drill. Wyoming big sagebrush typically occurs in valleys and plains where topography is often relatively level. There are also sites that tend to have low and sometimes variable precipitation. So they're not always the easiest sites to seed, but we wanted to see if it could be effective to seed after fire in these types of places. At each of these sites, the experiment was set up as a randomized complete block design with 5 blocks, and treatments were randomly assigned to blocks within plots. So that's what you see here. Each of these rectangles is a plot within a block. The dimensions are 70 meters by 30 meters. And the codes here are just different treatments. These were the treatments. There was a control that had no drilling and no seeding whatsoever. And then with the two different types of drills, we also had a control where it was a drill with no seed, with empty seed boxes. This was to look at the effects of the drill independent of seeding effects. Then we compared drilled with and without the seed, and then several different types of broadcasting. Broadcast through the drill, as I've described, the two types of broadcasting by hand, different seasons. The hand broadcasting was supposed to simulate broadcasting from an aircraft. It was done at a comparable rate to what we were doing through the drill, but it wasn't in those nice drill rows. It was just scattered everywhere. The other point to make is that Wyoming mixed sagebrush was done at 3 different rates, so there were additional treatments for it. This was the seed mix and the amount of seed that was placed at each of these sites. We tried to keep the seed mix relatively uniform. There was some variation. Things like yarrow weren't even seeded at some of the sites, but most things were pretty much the same. There were different seed sources for some of them, trying to get as local as possible. With the big sagebrush, we had those 3 different rates, the 1x baseline rate, and a 5x rate, which was about 5 times as much, and 10x, which was approximately 10 times as much. I should point out that the rates that have been reported by the BLM for seeding Wyoming mixed sagebrush are somewhere between what we used as the 1x and the 5x rate. So after all these treatments were carried out at these sites, we went back the first season after treatment, and then a year later and collected data. We got density and cover using quadrats and line point intercepts. And then all these data were subject to statistical analysis in SAS. The results that I'm going to present now were based on all 4 sites for both years, with treatment and year as fixed effects and random and site and block as random effects in a general linear mixed effects model. The next few graphs I'm going to show are showing a setup with controlled treatment over here. This was no drill, no seed, and then rangeland drill, minimum till drill, and you can see seeded and non-seeded for the 2 different years. This is density in meter squared per meter square for all the drilled species together. So this includes blue bunch wheatgrass, Indian rice grass, ball bunch squirreltail. Each of these species individually had a similar response to these treatments, and so I'm just showing them all together. You can see the mean values and the standard errors. Means with the same letter were not significantly different. The main effect here is that with seeding you do get higher densities of these species. There were some residual plants or new seedlings in these controls, but not very much. The other thing is that there wasn't a significant difference between these 2 types of drills within years, but between years there was a decline. So there were a lot of new seedlings that came up, but many of those died off. But on the other hand, while density went down from one year to the next, cover increased. And so this graph now shows cover. This is just to say that for all treatments, cover was higher in year 2 than in year 1. And because there wasn't a treatment by year interaction, there's just one letter above each treatment that applies to both years. And again, the cover was higher where it was seeded than where it wasn't, which is, again, not surprising, but reassuring. To help you visualize what was going on there, then here are some photos showing on this side the rangeland drill and the minimum till drill. This on the top is year 1 and year 2 on the bottom, not from the exact same spot, but you can see the emergence of those young grass seedlings in these treatments. So now looking at cheatgrass, we didn't collect data the second year, but for the first year, cheatgrass density had this pattern where there was significantly less in the rangeland drill than in this control. And we attribute this to the tilling effect of the drill. A lot of that cheatgrass seed that had survived the fire was buried and wasn't able to emerge. By contrast, the minimum till drill had a little bit more cheatgrass, but it wasn't significantly different from any of these other treatments. So now looking at cover, we had data for both years with cover, and it's roughly the same effect, although right here is sort of intermediate between these treatments. By the second year, it was a little bit different. Cheatgrass really took off everywhere, but the seeded treatments with both drills had less cheatgrass, and it was significantly less with the minimum till drill. So some photos to illustrate these points. On this photo, on this side, is a rangeland drill treatment and a minimum till treatment on this side. This is early in the season, 1 year after the treatment, and most of the green that you see is cheatgrass and other annuals. And so there's less green here because a lot of that got buried and didn't emerge. But by the second year, at the same site, we found that a lot of cheatgrass had filled in. These are the furrows of the rangeland drill. So these furrows happen to be a good environment for seed to collect and then establish. So next I'm going to look at some of the broadcast species individually. Western yarrow. Now you see more treatments for different types of broadcast. The drill broadcast, comparable rates to these fall and winter broadcasts. And I should point out that drill broadcast was done right before the fall broadcast, so these are mostly simultaneous. Main point here is that either any of these different broadcasting treatments will give you establishment of Western yarrow. It's a species that establishes fairly easily. But when you look at cover, you actually see that this minimum till drill broadcast treatment did much better than the others, which was kind of interesting. And this shows that treatment, those drill rows where the imprinting units had passed, and you can see a lot of yarrow coming in. Here's another view of that yarrow. Sandberg bluegrass was another one of these broadcast species, and it was a little bit more complicated because this was the one species that had a lot of residual remaining plants that survived the fire at these sites. So there were plants present in these control treatments. And interesting thing we found was that with the rangeland drill there were fewer plants than in the minimum till drill in these controls, which suggests that there was a negative impact of the rangeland drill on this species. But at the same time, seeding treatment compensated for that. So you did get higher densities, at least with the drill broadcast and fall broadcast. But for some reason, winter broadcast didn't do quite so well. With the minimum till drill, it was a little bit different. And the drill broadcast treatment was the winner in this case. I'm going to move on to the last species of interest, Wyoming mixed sagebrush, and this is the one where we now are looking across all the different treatments, including different rates of seeding. These two hand broadcast treatments are at the 5x rate. With increasing seeding rates, we found that we got higher densities. The 1x wasn't significantly different from no seed, but 5x and 10x were definitely higher. With the minimum till drill, the same pattern. But when you compare the same rate between these two different drills, it was higher with the minimum till drill, whether it was the 10x rate or the 5x rate. No significant difference at this 1x rate. Comparing the drill broadcast with hand broadcast in the fall, there was this contrasting pattern between the rangeland drill and the minimum till drill. It was higher with fall broadcast with this drill, but with drill broadcast here. Not sure exactly why that is, nor can we explain why the winter broadcast was the worst. Usually Wyoming big sagebrush is seeded in the winter. It's a common recommendation. It's often seeded over snow. One of our study sites didn't have any snow at that time. It was seeded in February, so that might have been part of what was going on here. So these photos just show what the sagebrush looked like at some of these sites, second year after the fire. This table was my way of summarizing all these graphs that I've been showing so far. And I'm not going to go through in detail again, but what this shows is a 0 means there wasn't different relative to the non-seeded controls. A plus means there was more, a negative less. And this is just sort of generalized across the density and cover graphs that I've shown. And then lastly, I should point out that there were differences between sites that I haven't emphasized because our analysis was just trying to look at general patterns across all the sites. But if you look at sites individually, you can see some differences. Some of the sites had a lot more residual plants, such as glass butte, which had a lot of things coming back, even in the non-seeded treatments. Mountain Home, on the other hand, was a low elevation site that had a lot of cheatgrass. And these other sites that also differed in different ways. So lastly, I just have these references that may be useful if you're not already familiar with some of the information that's out there for rangeland seeding and wildfire rehabilitation. And at this point, I'm done with my presentation, and I guess I can take any questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. So if anyone has questions, please type them into your questions box in your control panel, and we'll be happy to answer them. Mark Fries asks, is this research being published?
Yes, publication in process.
Do you have an ETA?
That we're working on it.
All right. Beth Corbin asks, did you look at biological soil crusts in this study?
We didn't in the burned areas because there weren't any to speak of. At a couple of the sites there were some adjacent unburned vegetation where crusts were examined. But that was part of a different component of this project, and different set of PIs were working on that.
Okay, thanks. Ryan Shane asks, why were no large perennial grasses included in the broadcast treatments?
Just because those are the ones that they can be drill seeded in those furrows. They have large enough seeds. The blue bunch, the squirreltail, and ricegrass, that it's better to drill them than to broadcast them. So it was just the Sandberg bluegrass that we broadcast because of its smaller seeds that it can't be buried too deeply.
Okay, thanks. Karen Colson asks, how does this compare to the results you might get when using non-natives like crested or intermediate?
Well, that's a good question, and we know that the non-natives are effective, as I showed in that those slides from the previous study. There aren't many studies that have compared directly the non-natives and the natives. But a study by Tyler Thompson that followed the work that I did back in Utah looked at that and found that the natives were a bit more risky, but this type of research is in the hopes that we can find more reliable ways to see natives and get consistent results.
Okay, thanks. Don Henderson asked, will this PowerPoint presentation be made available? Oh, yes, the answer is yes, it will. As soon as I have time to post it on our website. Okay, are there any more questions? That was the last one that's showing up on my screen. Okay, well, I will give my closing talk, but if there are more questions, please feel free to type them in, and if I see any more, I will interrupt myself. All right, so we would greatly appreciate it if you would take our 3-question survey of this webinar that will appear after the webinar has ended. A recording of this webinar will be sent to you automatically through the GoToWebinar system tomorrow, and I will also post it on our website within the next few weeks. If you have any further questions regarding this webinar or other topics, or if you have requests for future webinars, please email or call me at any time. All right, well, I don't see any further questions, so thank you all for your participation today, and thank you so much, Jeff, for your presentation.
Thank you.
All right, have a great day, and happy holidays, everybody. Bye.